Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight for what promises to be a really interesting and informative webinar. We've been overwhelmed by the number of registrations, which clearly proves that this topic is at the forefront of many of our minds. So DD are delighted that John Milne has taken the time to provide more insight into the work that CQC is doing and how they are adapting to the current situation and what it means for us and for the future of regulation within the dental sector. So to begin with, John will deliver a presentation to us, and this will be followed by a live question and answer session. We thank those of you who have already emailed us in some of your burning questions that you have. And my colleague Donna will be putting these to John later on to answer and challenge him. And if you would also like to ask further questions, please enter them into the Q&A tab on the Zoom chat in the question and answer box. And I will be noting these down, and hopefully we will get through them with John later on as well. So without further ado, I'd like to hand over to John Milne. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and thanks very much, Farzeela and Donna, for inviting me to talk with your clients. Really happy to be here, happy to tell the story of what CQC is up to at the moment. For those that don't know me, I'm a dentist. I work near Wakefield in West Yorkshire, which is where I am at the moment. Just might need to apologise if there are any noises off, because by a happy coincidence, my wife's engaged in a Zoom call in another room, so we'll just have to live with that. She'll have to hear us, and we might hear her a little bit. So onwards, let's change the slide over, please. So, oh, all right, that works, fantastic. So CQC's purpose and vision. I know everyone thinks they know what CQC does, but CQC is a massive organisation working in health and social care, and our purpose is to make sure that all those things, health, social care, provide people with safe, effective, compassionate care, and we do encourage services to improve. And that's the purpose. I always have a little bit of a wry smile when I look at the next bit, which talks about our vision, that of being a world-class regulator. It's a great aspiration, but it's a really hard one to live up to. I'd like to think that we're heading in that direction, but we hope to be able to drive improvements how people experience health and care services, so that everyone is in a safe place when they're receiving care. Do you want to change the slide again? We've been in a time of change, haven't we, with the coronavirus. Everything's been changing, and everything's been changing really quickly. And CQC tends to work in like 5-year packages of how we do things. And I joined CQC at the beginning of one 5-year bit, and we're just getting towards the end now. But because everything's changing, we need to know that to deliver our purpose, we also might need to change. So from hospitals to care homes, and in all the new kinds of online services that are springing up at the moment, the importance of our work and why we do it, it's more visible than ever. But we want the way in which we regulate to be simple. We want to have strong, open relationships with providers, the people that we work with, and we want to be more effective by focusing our actions on the areas that can have the biggest impact on people's experience of care. Do you want to change the slide again? So, unfortunately, I think we'd all say that the coronavirus is still around. Back in March, when all of this started, I think we all hoped it would be over and done with by Christmas, but it's still present and it's still a risk. And so CQC won't just be returning to business as usual. We will be thinking about changing. And part of that means that we won't be returning to our fixed timetable or the rules of frequency which we had on inspecting services. So, for example, virtually every care home that there is in England would get a visit from us every year. The next thing that we'll be doing is we're going to make sure that we hear people's experiences. And although we won't be going to our fixed timetable as much as often, on-site inspections are still a valuable tool, and we'll continue to focus on those where we've got concerns about what's going on in a place. We'll use the information that we've got to focus that thing. We will be proportionate though in terms of using on-site inspections, and hopefully during the course of this this talk I'm going to explain what we're thinking about for the future. But as well as you being able to ask me questions, which I'm really looking forward to, I'm going to ask you some questions too, and it may be that you'll get a chance to comment on those questions in the chat as we go on. We've been carrying out some pilots in health in adult social care and also in general practice. So particularly in general practice, we've been looking at people's records remotely, and I'll come on to that a little bit later on. So what's going on at the moment? Well, it says now, which actually means then. From the beginning of the pandemic, when we stopped visiting practices on a routine basis, we use what was called our emergency support framework. And that was a call carried out by one of our CQC inspectors. And don't forget that our CQC inspectors who call you know about dentistry. The vast majority of them have been only doing dental practices and dental services for the last 5 years. So they've built up a fair amount of knowledge. Some of them are dental registrants in their own right. Some are dentists, some are hygienist therapists, some have been practice managers. We've got a fair old mix of people working within our inspection team. The other thing that we've been doing during the pandemic is we've been working out how dentists and doctors and the whole of healthcare has been working together. So we've called those our provider collaboration reviews, and some of you may have been involved in those. But in terms of the emergency support framework, it was about an hour in length. It was meant to be supportive. I hope your experience has been that it was supportive, and we've had good reports of them. We did about 400 of those. Moving into the next few months from now until the end of April 2021, we're going to be using what we call our transitional regulatory approach, and it's an evolution from the ESF call. It's going to be a 1 to 2 hour call with the dental inspector. Our aim is for it to be about no more than 1.5 hours. That should be the maximum, and that call will be a dental inspector, and we'll be looking particularly at safety, effectiveness and leadership. We might even use technology such as Teams or things like that, and I'm interested in your views and your experience of that for those of you who've had them. Where necessary, we will come across the threshold. If we've got some anxieties about a place, if we've heard from whistleblowers or things like that, we may well still come and knock on the door and ask to have a look round. But if we do, that process is likely to be much more focused. And again, we're hoping for that to be the case moving on into the future, because in parallel with these transitional calls that are going on, we're also thinking about our future strategy, how we might need to change and what we might need to do to deliver that strategy. And again, we're interested in what you've got to tell us. And so we've been having these calls with many of you. Can you put the next slide on, please? So part of the purpose of our new strategy is that we're hoping to use our responsibility to change people's lives for the better. Now that runs off the tongue and it's really glib, but actually as an individual citizen of the UK, if my mum's going to go into a care home, I want to know that it's safe. I want to know that they're going to deliver effective care for her. And that's our role across the whole of society at CQC. And you'll see across the top of the slide, we've got four themes that we're going to take up, and I'll be just exploring those in the next few minutes. So could you change the slide again, please? It's really important for us at CQC that our regulation is driven by what people experience when they go for care. And so we'll be thinking about what matters to the public and to local communities when people access, use and move between services. We want people to feel listened to, understood, and we want them to know how we've reacted to what they've been telling us. So we're going to be doing a lot more about asking people what their experience of care is, asking the people who use care, asking the families, asking their carers. And if we're truly to put people at the centre, then we need to have the right tools and processes to act on what we hear. And so that's a strong ambition for us going forwards. And we understand that the voice of patients in dentistry is not always heard well, although there are lots of good examples where practices, particularly those that are well led, where they actually take the time to ask their patients what they want, what they think their needs are, and to ask them how services can improve. And so we'll be encouraging that sort of thing going forwards. And we're always really happy when we see that sort of thing going on. Do you want to change the slide again, please? Thank you. The next thing that we're hoping to do in the future is we're hoping to become a little bit smarter. We want to be simpler, we want to be more flexible, and we want to keep pace with how health and care is changing. So we're going to try and collect information digitally and share it with you to reduce duplication, so that it makes it easier for everyone to work with. We're going to be moving away a little bit from relying on periodic inspections, and again, I'll talk about that moving forwards. And it's really important, as while the coronavirus is still out there, and it's still a possibility that people can catch it, that we're flexible in how we operate to minimise the burden of the inspection on providers, whilst continuing to assure ourselves that services are being provided safely. So we want to be smarter in what we do, and again we'll be asking for your thoughts on that and really interested to listen. Can you change the slide over again, please? And safety is always been a huge and important part of our regulatory process. It's the first of the 5 key questions that we ask. Are services safe? And when it goes wrong, those are the things where we end up with dental services getting in the press. It's really important that our services are safe, and particularly at the moment when we're in the middle of a pandemic, it's really important that patients feel safe when they visit our premises. And it's been really good to see and hear what practices have been doing to keep people safe, how people have been using the social distancing, wearing the masks and the protective face gear, on all the loads of things that we've been doing to keep patients and our staff safe. We'll be particularly interested in infection prevention and control as we go forward. And I know organisations like those who are hosting this, I know that they're people who often can give you help and advice. Could you change the slide, please? The other thing that's really important to us from CQC is that we help people improve. And that's really been a tricky one for us, because actually over the last 5 years, people ask us loads of things. What can I do to get better? What can I do to fix this? And for those of us who go on our inspections, whether it's our inspectors or our specialist advisors, who again are all dental registrants when they go, we really do want to help people. But there's been a bit of a challenge to that within the CQC organisation as a whole. Some people think we should just stick to being regulated. If people are not doing things right, we should tell them. But others think we can perhaps encourage improvement, and that's the way that I've always looked at CQC's role, and it's certainly how I see my role. And so we want to provide a more active leadership role in driving improvement for people. And that means bringing health and care partners together to support improvement. And there are lots of organisations out there to help you. Donna and Farzeela work for one of them. And organisations like this want to help you to find your own route to improvement. And we will expect services to improve. But there is something that's just slightly tricky on that. Because if we were to say to you, go to Donna and she'll answer all your questions for you, and Donna gives you duff advice, then you'll be upset with us for recommending someone like that. Now, I'm sure that Donna and Farzeela are absolutely great in the care that they give you and the support they give you. But we're going to be thinking much more carefully about how we can organise what we call an improvement alliance with partner organisations. And that's going to work with you. We hope will work with you directly, so that individual practices where there's a need for things to change can find a way to do that. Can you change the slide again, please? So a little bit more about what we're doing at the moment. So moving on to our transitional monitoring approach, which is what we call it. And the key word in there is monitoring. The purpose of what we're doing in the next few months is monitoring how services are going. In terms of it being, it's not a mini CQC inspection, but I'd like to call it an appreciative inquiry, where we ask things of you and you assure us of things. And we'll be focusing in these TMA calls, which will take, as I say, an hour and a half at most. We'll be focusing on safety, on access and leadership. We'll be looking closely at areas like infection prevention and control, and we'll be asking you to share with us what you've been doing to keep people safe. I've just seen a note pop up that says we're sorry that the recording quality isn't good. It's not a huge amount I can do about that, but hopefully you'll be able to get some of it.
Sorry, John, to interrupt. I think there's a bit of interference now and again, you know, just when you're running through. Not quite sure what it is. I've had a quick look to see if there's anything that we can improve, but it's just crackling now and again for some reason. I don't know whether it's your microphone or the actual connection.
Yes, it all seems reasonable over here. The connection's good and the signal's reasonably good. But I do live out in the sticks a little bit, so so the quality of the broadband might be a little bit poor. But we'll try and bash on and do our best. Do you want to change the slide over, please? So what we've been doing with our services in the last 5 years is we've looked at 10% of dental practices per year. And the reason we look at 10% of practices per year is because instinctively we believe that dentistry is safe. Somebody just pinged a comment in that said, do you know that dentistry is safe? And the answer is yes, we do, which is why we've been working on a 10% model, which means that we've done 50% of all dental practices in the last 5 years. I think somebody just put a ping up that says it's my microphone, and I've not got any clothes anywhere close to it, so I'm not rubbing on theirs. We'll crack on. I will do my best. But some people have said to us, do you know what? A practice might be really good when you first visit it, but if it's only 10 years till you come and look at it again, things may well have changed. And so what we're thinking about is how we might change our methodology to perhaps have contact with more surgeries. We know that the vast majority that we've looked at are fine, but we're wanting to be smarter, as I say, in how we look at it. We might ask about access, and the calls that we make are intended to be light touch and supportive, with again an emphasis on whether care is safe, whether it's effective, and whether it's well led. Do you want to change the slide again, please? One of the challenges that we've got is that although we know there's a large number of practices that haven't been inspected, we don't know whether they're okay or not. Our assumption is that seeing as the rest were, then they probably are. And that's why we're changing our methodology a little bit. But we're open to the possibility that what we're planning now through this next few months with our transitional call might actually be the basis of how we might move in the future. And the slides change to the key lines of inquiry. So when you get called when you get called by our inspector, it will be a supportive call, but we'll be asking you questions based on the 5 key questions that you already know. Is care safe? Is it effective? Is it caring? Is it responsive? And is it well led? And one of the ways that I sometimes try and explain this is it safe? Would you let your mum go to that service? Would you let a member of your family go? Is it effective? If when you go, what's the chance that you will get the care she needs to make her oral health be sustained, maintained, and improved? Is the practice caring? Are they bothered about your needs? Are they responsive to them? And is it well led? Does the practice know what they're doing? And so the questions will be based around those 5 key questions. Can you change the slide over again? So at the moment, we're talking to lots of representative groups across the whole dental profession. We've talked to the BDA, we've talked to the FGDP, we've talked to the indemnity organisations. Anyone we can think of, we're talking to them. And from those conversations, we're going to put the basis forward of what we think will happen from the end of May next year moving forwards. But we'll have a consultation about that process to check that out with everyone running from January. Let's change this slide again, please. The conversations will be honest conversations. We are interested in what people think. We haven't made our minds up. We've got some ideas, and the summary of those are: we want there to be more frequent contact with practices that takes less time. We think that will build up a relationship with people, and we think that will be helpful and enable us to be supportive. We'll use technology more, although hopefully it'll work better than my microphone seems to be doing. So we might have a call with that uses Teams or Zoom or something like that. When we do cross the threshold, when we come to see you, we're likely to be more focused. So, for example, we know that many practices do sedation. So it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that we might come and have a look at a sedation practice to make sure that the sedation methodology is safe, that people are safe when they're receiving that type of care. And we're going to continue to work on helping people improve. That improvement agenda will be maintained, and we're interested in seeing how we can work together on that. So we've had some questions for you. These are the questions that looking forward to hearing your views on. Are the 5 key questions still appropriate? We think they do, but if you think not, happy to hear that. A random inspection still of value. What we mean by that is if we just visit a practice where we haven't got any concerns at all. Would rating dental services have any benefit? Dental services are the only ones that CQC regulates that aren't rated. What are your thoughts on that? And what do you think about what I've just said about more regular calls from the CQC? And what are your thoughts on using technology as part of our toolkit? So those are a few things that we're checking out there. We'd like to hear your views on. Do you want to change the slide, please? Oh, there we go. That's just one in that comes to questions. So I'm not sure what the next slide is. Is it a real slide or are we into questions?
I think we're now into question time. So thank you very much, John, for delivering that great presentation. And apologies to our audience for the microphone issues. We will have the recording available so you can kind of listen to it a little bit harder if you need to later on. But I think that the juicy stuff comes now where we start our Q&A session. So I'd like to hand over to Donna, our head of compliance, who's going to talk us through some questions that we've had in from our participants tonight.
Hi, good evening, everybody. And I'd just like to say thank you very much for sending all of your questions in. We did have quite a large response, so apologies if we don't get to cover them all. We don't want to keep John here all evening, although I'm sure he'd be happy to. And what I've tried to do is group them into sort of categories. So where repeated questions or similar questions came in, obviously we've just sort of pulled those together, you know, just so we can try and cover them all. So if it's okay with John, I think just picking up back on the CQC rating section, we know that you obviously have thrown that out to our audience, which is great, and we're hoping we'll get some feedback from DD members and customers that we can feed back to CQC. However, we do have a few questions around ratings from our practices asking how that would work, how would CQC ensure that it would be consistent. And if the practice didn't agree with the rating, if we were eventually rated, would there be a right to appeal process? So I've just sort of categorized those all together, if that's okay. There was a lot around ratings about whether we are going to be rated or not going to be rated, and if it's going to come in, when. But I think those are the three burning questions.
Okay, so first of all, I've seen on one or two social media outlets and people saying that CQC is definitely going to be rating dental practices. And although it is the only part of CQC's regulation where there is no rating, no decision has been taken, we are honestly listening and interested in what people say to us, because we know that there'll be a lot of hassle in introducing ratings. I'd like people to try and think of it in its purest way, though. First of all, would ratings help public choose services? Now, I think I mentioned earlier that if I was looking for a care home for my mum, I'd definitely be looking at the ratings, and I'd be looking at the CQC reports. So to what extent would that be helpful for people in helping them choose dental care? That's certainly one of the questions that's out there. The other question is how effective are ratings within CQC as a whole? 90% of general medical practitioners or general practices are good or outstanding, which then makes you think, well, is there a huge amount of benefit in the ratings process? And if we had been rating dental practices from the way in which our inspection process has gone over the last 5 years, I can tell you that probably 90% of dental practices would be good or outstanding. So in terms of helping the public make a choice, perhaps the ratings is not that helpful. The other thing is, does the ratings help a practice to improve? So at the moment, it's very much a yes/no answer when you have a CQC inspection. And certainly one of the things that I was very conscious of when I joined CQC was that you could have something relatively minor, or 2 or 3 things that were relatively minor that impacted on safe care, and your CQC report would say that your practice wasn't safe, when in truth you were, with some small improvements. With the rating system that CQC would use, if we were to do it, and I have to say again, it's a really, really big if, but the ratings are outstanding, good, requires improvement, or inadequate. So if you get a rating that says you require improvement, it'll say you need to improve how you store your drugs, or you need to improve how you monitor the emergency drugs to check whether they're in date or not. And the rating itself would help you work out where you need to improve. Now, could that be done without ratings in the way we write the report? Again, I'm really interested in what people are saying. And the strange thing is, with the ratings question, is that it breaks about 50-50. The people who are perhaps most confident that they'll get an outstanding or a good actually want ratings. People are less sure. If they think they've got weaknesses in the setup and things like that, I don't think people will be queuing up for a weak rating. Somebody just pinged that it says that CQC ratings would relate to what patients want. I think patient experience would have to play some part in that. And I can see that going forward, whether we rate or not, we will be looking to pick up what people's experience of care is. And again, that does need to be proportional, and I absolutely recognise that. So
Yeah.
to sum ratings up, it's not a done deal. We're hearing lots of varied opinion. Unfortunately, it's not weighted heavily one way or another, although people are really forcible in how they express their views, particularly if they're strongly against it. And those who are strongly for it put an equally strong case up for us to listen to. So ratings is an interesting one.
Yeah, and I think just to confirm, John, after we've spoken to many of our members recently and over previous months, particularly obviously when we knew that other healthcare providers were being rated, it was exactly the same then. It was a 50-50 approach. So it's going to be interesting. And again, obviously, one of the questions coming in is that, well, comments, I think, rather than questions, is, you know, patients potentially just going to look for the scores on the doors rather than the information about the service provider. So I think that's obviously probably one of the biggest fears. And if, like we said, practices don't agree with their own ratings, is whether there's a right to appeal. So will there be an official consultation period, John?
There will be an official consultation into the changes that are going to happen between January and April, and I can't say at this point whether ratings is going to be on the list. Somebody just said, does it influence choice in other sectors? It definitely does in adult social care. Yeah. In hospitals, I think probably less so, because you've only got one or two hospitals in your area, and you're stuck with it, whatever the rating is. Can you appeal against the rating? Yes, people can appeal against the rating, and they do.
Yeah, I mean, I think we've had, even just as we've been speaking, such mixed comments from the audience with regards, you know, some people agree, think it's great. And as Donna said, some people just think that it's going to skew people's perceptions and, you know, might not be the way forward. So, yes, it's interesting to note the varied reviews. And I actually think that they're all quite valid opinions.
Yeah. I can argue it really strongly one day, and 5 minutes later I can argue the opposite case with equal strength.
It's that devil and angel on the shoulders, John, that.
Absolutely.
I think most practices would probably be of the same opinion as well, depending on what day it is and what's happening. And in the current climate, we'll probably get a different answer again. So just moving away from ratings, just more around, we've had quite a few questions around IT. And as we've just seen, sometimes, you know, even on Zoom or Teams calls or these remote type sort of webinars and video calls, IT can be an issue, even though, you know, it seems to be working, you know, but before everybody jumps on the call. So a number of practitioners have asked whether if they don't have access to a computer or there's a problem, you know, with the IT for that remote inspection, can it be done, you know, in another format? So could it be done offline, for example, if it was to crash halfway through or they've got IT related issues? So I know there are some Q&A things around this, you know, on the CQC website, but I just wondered whether you could elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think in terms of these calls that are happening in the next few months, and as I say, it's not beyond the bounds of possibility that these might be the foundation of what I call the child of the transitional monitoring approach. The use of technology will be down to agreement with the practice and the inspector. I know these calls, there's been a few of these TMA calls happening in the last few weeks. Not quite sure how many, but some of them people have tried to use Teams, some of them have used Zoom, some of them have used FaceTime type things, so they've been video calls, and they've worked well. Somebody just put up they had one over Teams today and it worked really well. So I think if your broadband connection is good, if it's good in that where the inspector is coming from, I think it can be helpful. You can share documents on the screen. You can say, well, look, this is how we've risk assessed a particular process. It might be the fallow time or post aerosol generating downtime, whatever it's called now. So here it is. Have a look at it. This is what you think, and I'll just point my camera over here, and you can see in the surgery. You can see the process. You can see this is the place where people don and doff, put the gear on. This is how we get rid of the old stuff. You can see that it's modern. It might work well, but it's not going to work for everybody, and we can manage it just with a phone call if we need to.
Yeah, no, that's fine. We've actually heard of virtual HSE inspections happening as well. So if the HSE could do it, and I think it has worked very well from the feedback that we've got, and it was good to see that pop up, you know, during the chat.
Yeah.
The feedback that we've had.
I'll just say that we had a whistleblower talk to us about an orthodontic practice. And they said that the treatment was very poor and the practitioners' records were absolutely dire. So myself and the inspector, we did it with teams, and our inspector chose some random records of patients that the practice had been treating, and we just looked at some random ones, and we could tell virtually immediately that what the whistleblower had been telling us wasn't true. The standard of records, the standard of care was absolutely first class. So these things have got their uses.
Yeah.
Yeah, that's definitely seen that a lot, the kind of blue on blue, haven't you, in complaints, which does occur nowadays. But seeing as we're talking about technology, I thought I'd drop in one of the questions that someone has put onto the Q&A tab, linked to technology, asking, are CQC planning on creating an app for dentists to stay up to date with regulations, to seek assistance online, to provide like an easy platform for communication between practices and the CQC? I mean, I guess we've seen, you know, the BNF app and the SD-CEP and various others. Are there any plans in the pipeline for CQC to do similar?
There aren't any plans that I'm aware of, but it's an interesting idea, and I'll certainly take that one forward. And hopefully, when we finish this call, Donna and Farzeela, if you collect all the good nuggets that are coming through, because I keep seeing little things flash up with interesting stuff on. So I'd be really interested to get your comments on what people have said during the call.
Great idea. So, you know, they might want a commission or patent that idea once you know, introduce the app.
Yeah, that's come up before actually about CQC apps. And I think, like you say, because of the situation that we've all found ourselves in and everybody having to do more remote working, it's quite timely, isn't it? Like you say, with the TMA type of assessment as well. And just to let everybody know that the reason that we have been speaking with John, obviously originally we were getting a lot of questions into the compliance team here at DD about sharing radiation protection folders, because as everybody knows, they're quite hefty folders or online storage documents, including the file that we have through DD. So a lot of practices were concerned about whether they would be able to share that with CQC from a GDPR perspective and any other compliance documentation. And this is obviously where a lot of the questions have stemmed from. So it's good to hear that CQC are happy, you know, for practices to share the information.
Yeah. Well, what we're thinking about this is that we know that in recent times when CQCs visited, we might spend all day in the practice, and half of that day is taken up with looking at policies, and folders and piles of stuff. Now, it's really good that practices have got all of these things, and it's important that you have them. But what's even more important is that you're following what's in them. And so I think we want to cut down that stuff, because we can do it. Surely we can do it with technology, and that's what we're hoping and thinking about doing. So that when we do visit, we'll be less time on the premises, and we can find a way of you sharing stuff with us when we need to see it. But if I just you know, imagine let's think of a large corporate group, for example. I usually get in trouble if I make one up, but let's call it Tooth Savers, who are a large corporate body. When I've seen one Tooth Savers medical history sheet, I've seen them all. When I've seen one tooth savers cross-infection control policy, the rest are all going to be the same. And so what's the point in all that duplication? It's pointless.
And actually, John, that kind of then links to one of the other questions that we had come up tonight, where someone has asked, do the CQC prefer practices to use certain compliance companies? Obviously, you know, with DD, we offer a compliance service, and there are other well-known providers who offer compliance services and give you various templates and documents and risk assessments, etc., which you are then supposed to fill in yourself and make them personalized, obviously, to your practice. So someone has asked, do you prefer that style where it's kind of standardized from a company, or do you prefer an individual practice to do their own work?
Well, there are advantages and disadvantages of both. We've found practices that have subscribed to compliance organizations, but in terms of implementing the stuff that's in those policies and processes, it's just not gone home. Equally well, we found practices where they're not subscribed to any of these things. They're well led. Often they've got an empowered practice manager who can make things change, someone who understands the need to practice safely, and we find some great stuff there as well. So it's horses for courses, and it's up to you to make your mind up. Do we prefer it one way or the other? No, we're not interested. We're interested in the end point. Is the practice safe, effective, and so on when we get there and when we speak with you.
Yeah, and we always stress the importance of that as well, John, just, you know, to confirm that when practices are purchasing templates, whether it's from ourselves or other providers, it's there as a guide, you know, to support the practice. It doesn't mean that by having it and popping the name and address on it means that they're compliant, because it's about whether that reflects, you know, the actual policy and procedures, and whether they're implementing it, you know, and it's effective. We quite often, well, we pretty much do that every day that we speak to customers, is making sure that they're fully aware of that. So I think it would be interesting to see what comes out of the Improvement Alliance as well, you know, and the feedback from that. So just moving on, just conscious of time, there's a few questions around new providers, buying practices and selling practices. So there's one in particular around what's the process, is the current interview process and common questions, are they available during this transitional period, or would the TMA approach still apply, or is it slightly different on the question set? And then we've got questions coming up, I can see in the Q&A, about practices about to sell their practice or about to purchase practices. And would that trigger off one of these TMA inspections as well? So try and sort of group that together with buying and selling practices, if that's okay.
Okay. Well, in terms of when people are buying a practice and are having to register for the first time, there's a registration process to go through. And our registration team have also been experimenting with using technology and mobile phones and Teams and things like that. And I understand it's worked pretty well. In terms of selling practices, a lot depends on the structure of the organisation and of the legal entity that runs the practice. And unfortunately, the presence of NHS contracts sometimes makes this process rather convoluted, and I'm really sorry about that. And it's very difficult. I wish it weren't so, but I'm afraid NHS England do insist on their processes around changing the people who own the contract and stuff like that. So I'm sorry for people who found that difficult. It's not likely to be done with a TMA process, I'm afraid. I think the formal process will still go through.
Yeah, and that's what we believed it, obviously, which we've been speaking to practices about. And I think in the current climate there is a bit of movement, unfortunately, you know, for some providers. So it has sort of been coming up a little bit, and but you know, they just wanted clarification on it, really.
So that obviously that kind of addresses the new practices or squat practices that someone has mentioned.
Yeah.
What about another participant has talked about adding domiciliary services to their existing services. How would that work if they wanted to add domiciliary visits in?
I'd usually expect just to change your statement of purpose, just to add on that you're doing domiciliary services. It's not likely to necessarily trigger an inspection. If you did say you were going to make that change, it's possible it might trigger one of these TMA calls, but it's not certain.
Yeah.
I'd say don't lose any sleep about it, but you would need to change your statement of purpose.
And I guess the same would go for if someone is merging two locations, both have the same owner, registered manager, they just need to give CQC notice and let them know that they're merging the location.
Yes, I would say so. And I think what tends to happen on the ground in those circumstances is that the inspector who holds that relationship, our inspectors have each got a portfolio of 200, 300, 400, 500 practices or locations. What they would likely do is have a look at that, discuss it with our registration colleagues. If there are any concerns, it might trigger a call, it might trigger a visit. If there aren't any known issues, it may not make nothing might happen at all.
Okay. Thank you. So just moving on to...
Not my, you'll find I'm dithering a little bit around that stuff because it's not my main area of expertise.
Yeah, and I think obviously we had a few questions beforehand on it, and there's been a few coming through on the chat. So we'll make sure that we get back to everybody, you know, that is obviously asking specific questions in relation to that.
And if you haven't got an answer that's working, just ping it over to me and I'll get a response from somebody who really knows.
Thanks, John. So I think some of the others are more generalised around the TMA inspection. Obviously, you've already covered around how long, which is generally about an hour to an hour and a half. And most of the practices that I've spoken to or the compliance team have spoken to have confirmed, you know, that it is generally around that time. Obviously, some practices are asking whether they need to send all of their evidence before, during or after. And again, we've heard different feedback, you know, coming back from different practices, that some practices were only asked for, you know, 2 or 3 items of evidence, and it was screen shared during the TMA. Some obviously provided that after, and then other practices there was more information requested. So again, just on that, John, and I'm assuming that it depends on the answers that the practice is providing and how confident the CQC inspector feels, you know, during that questioning process. So
well, what should happen is that you'll get a call if you're going to get one of these TMA calls. The inspector or someone from CQC will phone you up and say, you're on our list and we're going to give you a call. You'll have a bit of time to arrange a mutually convenient time. So, and during that initial call, I would imagine that's the point. If the inspector's wanting to see any particular evidence, they'd ask you either to get it, email it to them, or just say, if we do Teams, you can screen share and things like that. Yeah. So those are all things that can be sorted out in the initial, what time should we do this call with the inspector. I think, as I say, this is it's a supportive call, really. So what we're looking for you to do is to say is to be able to say to us, look, you know, it's a tough time at the moment. We're working with lots of difficulties with the coronavirus. This is what we're doing to keep people safe. This is how we're handling our appointment systems. This is how we're giving people access to care when they need it. This is what happens for people who've got urgent care, all those types of things. We're wanting you to say to us, look, you know what, we're doing well at the moment, and we hope you believe us. and the answer is that most of the time we do, because we know it's true. Practices are doing well at the moment.
Yeah, and I think that's the feedback that we've received so far, you know, that it's actually been I wouldn't say painless for practices, but obviously the practices said that they were quite surprised, you know, about the TMA call, and that it did feel more supportive, just sort of making sure the practices are doing okay, you know, during this period. And obviously we have had quite a lot of questions about whether that call is recorded, whether it's then published, does it count as an official inspection? So again, you know, it's just to sort of reassure practices, I think, you know, and hopefully those that have already had one, we can see a few things popping up in the chat. The feedback has been positive.
Yeah, it's important to say it's not a mini inspection carried out over the phone. It is a monitoring process. Yeah. Now, you could hypothesize and say that if we said to practices, imagine the call went like this, how are you managing to mitigate the post aerosol generation procedure downtime? That's the fallow time. And the practitioner said to us, what's fallow time? Don't know what you're talking about. Not doing anything different whatsoever. Yeah. Then the chances are that we might think, I wonder if everything's okay there. Maybe this is one of those where we perhaps need to go and have a look.
Yeah. So that brings you on to nicely to your this slide that you prepared. So I just thought I'd put it up there for you.
That's the question we get asked probably about 20 to 30 times a day, John. And I'm just speaking from the compliance team here today as well, not even our engineering and equipment teams.
Yeah, somebody said, could the TMA call be handled by both the practice manager and the provider? Yes, it could. It's up to the practice. You choose who's going on the call. Just get the right people on the call is what we would say. Get people on there who know how the practice works and how everything's going. It'll be fine. So yeah, air purification, ventilation, guidance, all of these sorts of things. What I would say is, as it says on this slide, think carefully, document your rationale and validate the process. And the yardstick, I would say, is think about the next patient in the room. Now, dentists have been arguing since the beginning of the pandemic about whether it's possible to catch it from somebody having an aerosol generating procedure. And the truth is, we don't really know. You can catch it from standing next to somebody in the pub. So this virus is easy to catch. And the fact that there's been so many cases rising lately tells us that there is something to be thought about here. So put yourself in the position of the next patient in the room. Would you want to be the next patient in the room following an aerosol generating procedure on a patient who, unknown to you, unknown to the dental practice, is actually carrying the virus and is asymptomatic? Think about that. And if you're happy to be that next patient in the room, then the chances are you're getting it right. So there's a new appendix, a dental appendix, come out from Public Health England, and that draws on the work from the Scottish Dental Clinical Effectiveness Group, with lots of worthy people on there, and the FGDP have been involved in, were involved in that process, and the BDA and the like. And there's lots of information there about how to keep people safe. And ventilation seems to be the key. And you can read how many air changes per hour you might need, and have a look at that. And if you're doing something to improve the ventilation, document why you're doing it and what you're doing. So for example, if you've decided that the answer for your surgery is to put an extractor fan that will change the air 10 times in an hour or something like that, then you need to be able to show either an inspector from CQC or a health and safety executive person, if they choose to have a look at it. You need to show them what your thinking is, how you've worked it out, and how confident you are that it works. So in terms of these machines and things like that, I would advise you to go to reputable manufacturers, members of the British Dental Industry Association, and so on. if someone in the pub that you're no longer allowed to go to says, hey, I've got this machine here, you can have it for 50 quid and it'll change all the air in 30 seconds, and it's got a Wizzo kilo germ machine inside it, and you can eat your dinner off it when you're finished, then perhaps you need to exercise just a little bit of caution. So use your intelligence, you're the professional. Think, would I want to be the next patient in the room? Is the equipment going to do that? And I know there's difficulties for practices with surgeries without natural ventilation. There's difficulties for surgeries where it's going to be difficult to install that. And so there is equipment that's available. And the appendix that Public Health England have written have said what they think about the various methodologies. Some seem to get more traction than others. So think carefully about it, but put yourself in the place of that next patient and you won't go far wrong.
Yeah, and I think it's a really good point. I mean, obviously it's the burning question we get asked every single day. Have you got a template risk assessment for ACH and fallow time? And that's probably the most common question we've had all the way through the pandemic. And of course, like we say, every practice setup is different. The control measures are different. You know, obviously everybody needs to look at their practices, which surgeries they're looking at for AGP or non-AGP or AGE, and have a look at that. But of course, what we've said is just have it documented and the rationale behind it. So, you know, you've got that evidence that you've given it some thorough investigation before you've made your decision, particularly if they're making purchasing decisions, you know, on the back of it.
Just in case anybody thinks that the pictures that you just put up are things that CQC is recommending, CQC doesn't ever recommend anything.
Bring them back
we say it's up to you to, yeah, that's it, it's up to you. So I have to give credit to Charlie and Rufus. Charlie and Rufus is, for those that haven't seen it, is it's a YouTube thing which takes the mickey out of all things dental, in particular regulators and the like. And I don't mind there being a bit of humour. The one in the middle is called an aerosol box, and they would be incredibly difficult to clean. And there's been some studies done in Australia with anaesthetists that show that they make things worse, not better. So think really, really carefully about the stuff that you're using. Listen to what the manufacturers say, but always think at the back of your mind, these people are wanting to sell me something.
Yeah. I mean, it's like with any piece of equipment, I think, you know, that we buy, that we use, you know, we need to kind of think about the evidence behind it and what the manufacturers are saying, and make sure we use things properly. I'm going to take us on to a different topic, because I think everyone's probably inundated with the kind of fallow time ACH topic. You know.
And I think we've already done about 7 or 8 webinars on that, haven't we, Farzeela?
But if you do want some more information, more than happy to provide it.
Just in terms of how CQC will be looking at it, we'll be asking you what process you've gone through to arrive at your conclusions for how you make people safe. If you tell us something that's really wacky, we're likely to come and have a look. If what you're doing fits in with what the vast majority of people are doing, following the guidance that's been issued by Public Health England, then you're not likely to get into any trouble with us.
Thank you. So a different question that we've had from a couple of people has been, will inspectors start to be more supportive and act in an advisory manner going forward with inspections and TMAs? Because the feedback from some people has been that previously, when they've had inspections, it's either one way or no way, and what the inspector says and thinks has to be done, whereas obviously there are some things that you can do in a variety of ways. So are they going to take on a more supportive advisory role going forwards?
Well, I would hope so. And the other thing I would say is that if any of you feel that that the process has not been working well, let's just say, if you think somebody's being over dogmatic or something like that, I'm really happy to hear about that, because that's, for us, that's a training opportunity. The thing about regulation from CQC is if we're not doing it properly, and the people who are on the end of it don't feel that it's fair and sensible, then the whole process is undermined. So I'm always happy to receive feedback, both good or bad. We get an awful lot of good feedback, and occasionally we get some that's bad, and sometimes we just have to have a word in somebody's ear, and it tells us where to point some of our training for our inspectors and our specialist advisors. So always happy to get feedback. The process, certainly with the TMAs, is meant to be a supportive one, as I've said. The challenge, of course, going forward is that we can't duck our regulator responsibility, which is to ensure that services are safe. So sometimes we are going to have to say, you know, this is not safe. Things need to change, and we can help and point people out in how to do that. And also, as I said, in the Improvement Alliance thing, we're hoping to work on that process in the next few months. We're interested in working with people who can help practices to improve. So yeah, we will be supportive, but we can't duck the fact we actually have a responsibility to the public as well.
It's a fine balance, isn't it? Regulation, that kind of right touch, right, you know, right time, right point, all of that, which obviously the GDC also are trying to do, and get that right touch feel. And I think the same with CQC, trying to find that balance is tricky sometimes, and people don't always agree, but it has to be done in order to make sure we're safe.
Yeah. Absolutely. Another question that we've had a number of times before the webinar, and I can see there's a few similar type questions as well being raised on the live Q&A, is how do CQC decide who is going to receive a TMA? And a number of practices are asking if there has been issues potentially in the past or improvement notices issued to those practices, would they find themselves subject to a TMA, you know, assessment?
Well, one of the first things is that, as I put on one of the slides, there's about 5,000 practices that we haven't had any engagement with at all in the last 5 years. So that's probably one marker about whether people will get a call or not. The other thing is, if there has been some regulatory action in the past, then it's possible you might get one of the TMA calls. We are getting an awful lot of dental professionals are telling us that the place where they work is not providing safe care at the moment, because people are not abiding by the right procedures for reducing the fallow time. People are not wearing the right PPE, providing all the right PPE, and so on. So we are getting a lot of that at the moment. And where we get that sort of information, again, it's possible you'll get a TMA. But just because you get a TMA, it doesn't mean that any of those concerning things have happened at all, because the vast majority will be on a random basis.
And someone has asked, how much notice are they going to get if they get notice?
You will get notice, because the inspector will phone you up and we'll work out with you when's a convenient time. Because we know that if we ring you tomorrow, you may not have an hour and a half spare to have a conversation with us. So you'll get plenty of time to organise that.
Somebody's popped on the chat as well, and we did receive something similar yesterday, that on a couple of the TMA calls, photographs have been requested of staff when GDC information's been confirmed, and recruitment processes and things like that. So is that something that you're aware of, John? Because I've not heard of that up until yesterday, and then somebody else has popped it in the Q&A this evening. So I thought maybe it was just, you know, an anomaly. But there's another one on the Q&A this evening. So now we've had it twice in the matter of 24 hours. I feel like I need to ask the question.
Well, and I saw it pop up on a Facebook thing earlier in the day as well. And so, yes, that's a bit of a new one to me. I can't see that there's any requirement. I do know that one of the things that happens on an ordinary inspection is we expect a practice to have proper ID for the staff that they take on, and that includes photographs. So it may well be that what the inspector's doing is working their way through the process about whether you're sure that your IDs of your staff are appropriate. So I think there'll be a bit of variation on that theme. If it's a real issue and people are worried about it, happy to hear your comments. But I think that's probably the basis behind it.
Yeah, I mean, that was our potential understanding of that question, that it was maybe part of ID checks and sort of recruitment process, etc. But yeah, the question was specifically around photos. I'm not sure whether it was just asked as part of that, you know, questioning process, really. And then one that I always get, John, which I'm sure you get, is why do we need regulation? When we're already regulated enough, and particularly in the current climate, when we've spoken with practices about imminent TMA assessments, and I think somebody's just popped on there, they've got one at 10 o'clock tomorrow morning, so good luck with that. We wish you all the best. Why are they having that? And I know you've alluded to this at the beginning of your presentation, and about how important it is, you know, that monitoring continues during the, you know, the pandemic to us, to confirm safety, and, you know, the key lines of inquiry are being adhered to. But yeah, you know, I get it all the time, you know, why do we need regulation, and is it to keep you in a job, Donna, is what I get quite often.
Well, it keeps you in a job, and it keeps me in a part-time job as well. So, but the real answer to the question is, why do we need regulation? The answer is because there's a knowledge imbalance between professions and the public that they serve. The vast majority of members of the public don't know whether they're receiving safe care. They don't know whether they're getting effective care or not. What they know is my dentist nice to me, and things like that. But they're not. They don't have the knowledge required to know whether what they're getting and what the process is actually safe, whether they're likely to come to harm. And that's why governments historically, over loads of areas where there's a knowledge imbalance, have brought in regulation. So the regulation is for the protection of the public, and it's necessary even where the vast majority of the professions that are being regulated are good. There are still, unfortunately, there are some places where the public don't get good care. There are some places where the public are exploited. There are places where the care is not safe. The cross-infection control is poor, and without regulation, that wouldn't be picked up. So I'm afraid that regulation is a fact of life in today's society. What is important, though, is that where there is regulation, and this works for the GDC as much as it does for the GDC, sorry, for the CQC, what's important is that the regulation is proportionate, and the regulation is fair. And I always try and put it like this, is that if I was doing a CQC inspection tomorrow, which I don't often do, but were I to be doing so, and I was to show the results to you at the practice and your colleagues who know you well, I would hope that they would be able to say, do you know what, that's a fair assessment of what this service is like. There's room for improvement there, and this is really good, and let's shine a spotlight on the good stuff as well. So I'm sorry that regulation's necessary, but it is.
Well, that kind of brings us nicely to a conclusive end, I think. We have answered quite a few questions. We've managed to get through quite a lot, but I realized that we have gone over time by about 10 minutes. So I know everyone has got plenty of things to do this evening, including watching Bake Off. What we will do is the questions that haven't been answered, we will gather them together, and Donna and I will go through them with John over the next few days, and we will endeavour to get answers out to you. The recording will also be available as well, and there's a slide here which you can see where we've put some useful email addresses that you can use to contact us for more information on anything that we've discussed this evening, including a TMA guide which may help you. But other than that, I think I'd just like to say thank you very much to John for taking the time this evening, and thank you to Donna as well for some brilliant questions. And thank you to our audience for being so great with your questions and listening to us on this evening. And we look forward to welcoming you again for more upcoming webinars. Have a lovely evening all. Take care.
Thank you.
Thanks
Bye.
very much, everyone. Thank you.
Bye.